Hey friends, it's Sarah, and in honor of February being Black History Month, I wanted to talk about a collection of Black historical romances that I read recently. As usual, I've ordered these from the one that I enjoyed least to the one I enjoyed the most, although none of them were bad. It's just some of them were fine and some of them were great. So first up is More Than This by Krystal Marquis, and this was a 3-star read for me. This is the second book in the Davenport series, which is a YA duology, I think. There's been no third book announced yet, and it does wrap things up nicely at the end of this one, so I believe it's just going to be the two, but hasn't been fully confirmed that I could find. This is set in Chicago in the 1910s and it follows a well-off Black family and a couple of their friends. The first book, which I actually bought, came out 2 years ago and I had given it 4 stars. And then the second book finally came out and I was like, oh, perfect, I can read it. And was like, I need a recap because I could not remember what had happened in this one, to be quite honest. But like the first book, this one follows 4 Black girls, Olivia, Ruby, Amy Rose, and Helen, as they navigate society, start their own businesses, and fall in love. Like I said, I didn't reread the first book, so there was a bit of a struggle at the beginning trying to remember what everyone was up to and what had happened to them last book. And I think maybe because of that, I didn't feel as strongly about some of the relationships in this book. There were a few kind of second chance romance things happening in this book that I kind of didn't love as much because I didn't remember them from the first book, so that was just my bad. I would suggest reading them together. However, this book was also pretty long for a teen romance. It's 384 pages, so it's pretty chunky for a teen romance, and I do think that kind of hindered it a bit. It should have been edited down slightly. There were parts that felt like the book was just kind of spinning its wheels, and some plot lines were definitely a lot more interesting than others. One of the plot lines just kind of felt like it did nothing for most of the book, and it was just and we're back with this character because we have to have an equal amount of each character, when she really didn't have as much story as the rest of them. So that was unfortunate. This takes place over the course of, I think, 3 months. It's supposed to be over the summer, I think. And it felt like a lot happened. We're juggling 4 different plot lines, things are happening really quickly, but then also obstacles were overcome with a lot of ease. So it's oh yeah, we're developing this thing, and all of a sudden it's fine, and we've just invented this new thing, or come up with a new design for this thing. I'm trying to speak vaguely so there's no spoilers, but it was just things like that where I was I don't think this would take some teenagers a month to do. This seems like something that would take a year to do. But you know what? It's a teen book, so we're going to give it some grace on that. One of the reviews that I read on Goodreads said they wish that each book had just focused on 2 of the main characters, and I think that would have been great. It would have felt more cohesive, it would have been easier to delve deeper into the story, and maybe they could have been happening at the same time, but just with the 2 different characters, or they could have offset them slightly. I know they were trying to have them all, they're all the same age, they're trying to have them all have their season at the same time, that sort of stuff. But I just think trying to juggle 4 pretty in-depth plot lines, it was a lot. It was a lot to ask of this book. But overall, it is a really cute kind of escapist romance. I enjoyed how all of the young women made their own choices and kind of took charge of their own destinies. I thought it was pretty sweet, and the romances ended up being pretty cute. So it was just 3 stars, but I think I could definitely see it being at least a 3.5 if I had remembered what had happened in the first one. So that's a little bit on me, but oops. So up next, I read Rebel by Beverly Jenkins, and this is 3 stars as well. It follows Valinda, who is trying to run a school to help the recently emancipated community learn to read and write after the Civil War, but then a group of thugs destroys the school and they come after her. Captain Drake Levesque saves her and becomes invested kind of in helping her rebuild the community, and his family rallies around her to help her find lodging. After that, kind of falls out from under her as well. And this was actually the second Beverly Jenkins book that I read. I think that Beverly Jenkins does a really good job of researching the historical parts of her books. She covers interesting, kind of forgotten parts of history, or ones that aren't discussed as often. So, like, for example, this book takes place during the Reconstruction period, during the aftermath of the Civil War in the US, which I feel like most Civil War books are like, it's in the middle of the Civil War, or like, that was ages ago, and not the kind of like messy part of we're trying to rebuild society after all of these changing cultural norms and everything's completely different and a mess. And Parsnip has decided to join us. I also appreciate that Beverly Jenkins doesn't shy away from some of the more serious aspects of what characters would have faced in this time period, but she does balance it pretty well with like lots of love, the romance, good relationships. But the reason this is 3 stars is I just don't think I jive with Beverly Jenkins' writing style. My theory is that she writes kind of an older style of romance. She has been writing romances for like 30 years, which is really impressive. And I just think it's a bit of an older style that doesn't appeal to me. And what I mean by that is like there's really an emphasis on the physical attraction between the main characters more than the emotional one, which isn't my preference in a romance. I think she creates interesting characters. I've liked all the characters that I've read in her 2 books, and especially the female characters. I think she does a good job of making them really interesting and strong, but I also have a hard time with the pacing of the relationship progress. I think this is also kind of an older style where it's a sudden turn in the story from like, you know, they're maybe enemies or something, there's the unrequited feelings, they're like desiring each other, and then like, bam, they're in love. And it's like, wait, what? What happened? Where's the emotional development? Sometimes like, you know, they're fooling around or something beforehand, but then they just all of a sudden like, it's love now. And I like a bit of a slower burn. I like a bit of a longer progression in my books. So for those reasons, this guy was only 3 stars for me, unfortunately, but it was fun. It was interesting to see a different style of romance than I generally read. Up next is the other Beverly Jenkins book that I read. That was Tempest, and it was 3.5 stars for me. I read this one first, actually, and it's set in the Wild West, kind of in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Reagan, the main character, is a mail-order bride, and during her trip on her way to meet her husband-to-be, she's attacked by highwaymen. She manages to fend them off, only to spot another group of men heading at her, and so she shoots at them, and she's like, not today, guys. Strikes one of them in the shoulder, only to realize that that man is actually her intended Dr. Colton Lee. On his end, he's not super impressed that the well-educated woman he had been corresponding with seems to be a little bit feistier and more rough and tumble than expected, because he's not really looking for love, he's just looking for someone to help raise his young daughter, so he kind of wants her to be like a homebody, like quiet, demure, just take care of the kid, and they can just kind of coexist peacefully. But despite this rocky start, their attraction is unmistakable, and their marriage at convenience might actually turn into a true love match. I really loved Reagan in this. She was strong, capable, funny, and she just like was no nonsense, took no guff. Colton was less of a strong personality. He was just kind of spent most of the book being like, huh? You're college educated and you can do farm things? But he was also like a good dad. He wanted the best for his daughter, wasn't quite sure how to provide that. So like that redeemed his character a little bit, but the romance in this kind of gets put to the side in favor of Reagan being welcomed into the community, which was fine, but I really want to explore more of their emotional connection. Because their relationship in this is based mostly on their physical attraction and both of their relationships with Colton's daughter, Anna. I did love Reagan's relationship with Anna. I thought it was very sweet. I enjoyed how she drew the young girl out of her shell. There's also like a little action plot at the end of this book, which was fun, but it was kind of like here and gone pretty quickly, and it would have been maybe a bit more interesting to have like drawn that out more in the book. A lot of the middle of this book focused on Reagan just kind of like charming the locals and getting involved in the community, which was nice and like good to show more than just the like romance. I appreciated that, but it did drag a bit. It felt kind of repetitive because the middle section was just Reagan visiting a new neighbor, befriending them, then coming home and getting railed by her husband, only for him to shut off emotionally right after and for her feelings to get hurt. And like, I think, again, this is kind of like an older style of romance. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a seasoned romance reader. I have not really read any of the Nora Roberts books or anything, but it just feels kind of like, and it's all physical, and then all of a sudden we're in love. Oh, Daisy makes a wild appearance. You're not usually on camera. Hi, Daisy. This is my other cat. Oh, and she's gone. There were a few instances of racism in this book where the family kind of has to deal with that, but it wasn't a huge plot point. It didn't really affect them all that much. So that was kind of a nice, like, bit more escapist, less dealing with like the real life atrocities happening in ye olden days. And like most of the conflict happened because Reagan is like an outsider and the community's like, well, I don't know about you. You are different. So 3.5 stars. Again, not terrible. Just I think Beverly Jenkins writes a different type of romance than what I tend to enjoy. The final book that I wanted to talk about in this video was An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole, and this was 4 stars. This was my favorite of the bunch that I read, and it is the first one in this, what they call Loyal League? This is the first one in the Loyal League series. This is book number 3, just holding it up as an example. And obviously I liked it enough to get both book 2 and 3 out of the library, so it was a good book. I liked it a lot. In this one, Elle Burns is a former slave who has an eidetic memory, making her an ideal spy. So she returns to the South, poses as a mute slave in a senator's house in order to pass information back to the Union. And then on the other side, Malcolm McCall is a Scottish detective for the Pinkertons' Secret Service, trying to infiltrate Confederate forces, also to pass info back to the Union and more specifically to the Loyal League. This is another series that takes place in a like really intense historical setting. Alyssa Cole goes into even more detail about how brutal it was to be Black during the Civil War than Beverly Jenkins did, and the characters are dealing with this really horrifying racism in different ways. Elle obviously is a subject of a lot of racist talk and treatment, being Black, and then Malcolm on his end has to say a lot of like really upsetting things in order to ingratiate himself with the group that he's trying to infiltrate, and obviously Elle's having a much rougher time because Malcolm isn't in as much danger, but it is interesting to see kind of like from an outside perspective what he's witnessing her go through, and then the things that he's like not doing stuff, but like he's having to like agree with really horrifying things that people are saying. I really like the dynamic between these two characters, and I thought there was a really well-paced progression from their like originally annoyances to eventual lovers. Elle was another great strong character, and Malcolm also had a pretty strong personality. Their bickering was lots of fun, and I enjoyed it when they worked together. They're both like stubborn, they butted heads, but when they got along, it was just beautiful. And then again, there was like a little bit more focus on the physical aspect of the relationship, but they did have some good emotional development throughout the book, and I think it was getting closer to the type of romance that I like to read. There's also like a lot of action and plot in this book because they're both doing like their little spy things and passing messages and trying not to get caught. So it is a lot more like plot than just a romance. I would say like the Beverly Jenkins ones kind of felt like romance and like here's the setting and like a bit of plot, whereas this one's like plot and also they're falling in love, which I quite enjoyed. And like I mentioned, I put the other 2 books on hold at my library, so that's I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. So those are the 4 Black historical romances that I read this Black History Month, and they're all pretty good, some better than others, but like I enjoyed all of them. And I'd love to hear if you've read books from any of these authors, if you have any other recommendations, because I really love historical romance. I think this is my this is my romance niche. So if you have any other historical romances, specifically with Black authors, or really any historical romances, let me know down in the comments, and I'd love to hear them. But thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book. Do I have the first book? I did. I bought the first book. Hang on. I have a script, and then I go off script, and then I say the things that I wrote later in the script, so we're gonna say them again. And here's Miss Daisy. Okay, Daisy, will you show the people? She says, I will show the people my grumpy side. Be a murderous little baby. And she is.